and self-determination theory. These are powerful frameworks that can transform how you think about leadership and what it means to build a thriving organization. By the end of our time together today, my goal is for you to walk away with clarity about why dynamic leadership matters for small businesses that are intent on growing and scaling, and how it can help you create a roadmap for growth, both for your business and your people. Later in this series, I'll introduce a regularly scheduled Q&A to address real-world questions as they arise for you. There are several leadership approaches or styles that you could consider. In looking at the broader landscape and having been involved deeply in command and control, servant leadership, participative leadership, none of those are one size fits all. They all have gaps, and those gaps exist. And unless you find a way to fill them, you're going to have some blind spots. I'll just give you a quick example. Command and control, which was very, very popular in the 70s and the 80s. It served a lot of the companies during the baby boom era when that group was moving through the workplace. However, when you look at command and control, where it really works is in the military, right? And in the military, you have a lot of levers that can be pulled. Anything from just threatening or putting in a suspended action where if they do it again, money will be taken from them, or perhaps you could take away freedoms, all the way up to court-martial. And it's also in the military, it doesn't take anything to relieve somebody from a position. Think about that in the context of an organization where you are dealing with performance management. Firing somebody there's a lot of requirements that surround that. In the military, at least in the United States, a person can be relieved of command or relieved from their duties, and then they'll just be put into a different position. They usually maintain their rank, although that could be knocked down, but they'll typically hold their rank but just get reassigned. It's a lot different than thinking about it in terms of firing somebody. My point in bringing that out is that command and control works because there's these levers that can be pulled, and it's always the person's choice. Do they want to go through that next door or stay where they are? And the next door is always worse than where they are. And that's why it works. We can't recreate that in the workplace, at least in the US, because there's just laws. There's laws, there's protocols, you have consumer behavior. We've all seen where consumers would react to something that a company is doing with their workforce. So command and control is one that it has its place, but you have to understand where and when to use it. Dynamic leadership sits on a continuum between command and control and servant leadership. Now, on the other end, you have the servant leadership, and this is typical. You see this in sales organizations where the top salespeople are able to get certain perks, and they have certain allowances because they're producing so much. Well, that has limits as well. And of course, it works to a degree in the sales environment because there's commissions. It's presumed that those salespeople will rise to the occasion and will do the job that's necessary because of the commission. However, we know from experience in years and years, you can go back and look at bonuses, you can look at commissions. People are always leaving money on the table. It's not a panacea. Now, you can add recognition. This is another way to get the best performers to rise up to that next level. You can have recognition. And if you think about it in the context of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I'll be talking about today, the challenge is there's always going to be a cap, because at some point it's easier for them to get that need met in other ways than it is to sell more product, for example. And then you can add another level. Sometimes they have things like the inner circle or the president's club or something like that. And that's where you can take the best of the best and they can meet with the senior staff. And then that gets into self-determination theory where you have some relatedness. So you're adding in needs to the incentive program. And a takeaway from there, I'm not saying don't use servant leadership. What I'm saying is they all have limits and they have a place, and you want to know what works where, when, and how. And to take away from this last part of the conversation about incentives, it makes sense to have a commission structure that increases the payment as production goes up. So Once they hit a threshold, their the commission percentage goes up. They hit another threshold, the percentage goes up. It's not a panacea, but it does bring people up, and it limits the amount of money that gets left on the table. Then after that, you have recognition. You have a recognition area, and I don't like to think of this as a zero-sum game. The recognition should be a level. Once they hit a certain level, then they're recognized with a trip or special award, something, right? Now you're getting into the esteem need. But then after that, as I said, there's going to be a point where it's easier for them to just take the money that they've made and pay for the trip themselves than to do the extra work. But you can get some more people off the sidelines by adding in an opportunity where they can interact with the senior leadership team, the CEO, the president, sales vice president, etc. And it does two things. One, it taps into the relatedness need in terms of self-determination theory. It also taps into that feeling of competence. It also builds on the esteem need. If you're looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you could see it in a sense where there's some self-actualization, because now this person is able to sit shoulder to shoulder at dinner, for example, with the president of the company, and can have some influence with the organization, and that fuels that self-actualization need. So if you're tracking with me, what I'm talking about is looking at incentives, but also looking at human needs. I talked about the 5 agreements. If you agree on these 5 things, then I think you'll also see the value in dynamic leadership. So I start with these, and these will carry a theme throughout. I've already touched on it a bit. But first, we have the brain. The human brain is over 100,000 years old. Now, you'll see this stated as a couple of million years old. That's because the base, the amygdala, the old animal brain, etc. But by saying it's greater than 100,000 years old, it captures all of that. That's important because we could spend our time focusing on new strategies, new processes, the new fads, what's the latest thing that we could work on. But the reality is, if the brain is 100,000 years old, it's not likely to change. We don't have to look far to find information or to find best practices that we can apply today. That's a big part of it, and that's why I go back to the human needs. I've often said that the philosophers from and before the New Thought era, the New Thought era would be 1850 or so to about 1940, where it was supported by the advent of the printing press. But this was a time when a lot of the New Thought literature, a lot of the success literature, Law of Attraction was created during that period. Think and Grow Rich was written during that period. The Game of Life, Wallace Waddell, William James, Ralph Waldo Emerson. These were in that period, that New Thought era. If you look at Ralph Waldo Emerson's essay on compensation or initiative and self-reliance, they still ring true today. It's not different. What is different is that the philosophers didn't have the brain imaging capability that we do today. They weren't clear on what's actually happening between the conscious and the subconscious. And as a result, there are some people who look at the subconscious as being above, but the name tells you what it is. The subconscious is below the conscious. So part of the work is to put the conscious mind in charge. Now, that's out of scope for this topic, but it is the first 4 areas of the 7 fitness areas. We focus on agency and personal leadership, because in order to apply dynamic leadership, we have to have personal leadership and agency, because if you don't, it's too easy for the leader to be triggered. The brain is 100,000 years old. Dynamic leadership supports all of those theories that you'll look at from the New Thought era. They're all supported by dynamic leadership, which is why I've selected that one. The next one was that 2/3 of our waking hours in a week of a work week are spent at work. So that leaves 1/3 of their waking hours to do everything else: commute, eat, maintenance, shopping, running the household. All of that is crammed into that last third. So this is an important point because it shapes the person. If you look at the work around mirror neurons, we know that our surroundings influence us. If you consider that 2/3 of their waking hours are spent at your place, it suggests that you should be paying attention to culture. And culture is intentional. I've seen leaders that say you can't really do anything about culture. And I think that's misguided. I do think it's very, very difficult once the culture is in place. But if you're a leader of a small business, you very much can do something about culture. You are setting the culture whether you decide or not. And that's how we get into this thinking that you can't do anything about culture. If you don't do anything, the culture is going to form on its own. So the point is, you want to be intentional about that. And then the other one was human needs are going to be met. And they're going to be met whether you do it or not. When you look at compliance, and we've all been there, you try to get somebody to comply with something, it's so easy for them to put in a workaround. And now with artificial intelligence, and I don't want to blame it on artificial intelligence, this is a trend that's been happening where more and more and more information was put at the fingertips of the frontline worker. As that increases, the frontline workers, they have the information that you as a leader need to be competitive. We can't force them to give the best of who they are. We can't make people give the best version of themselves. We can inspire it, and that's where we'll get into intrinsic motivation. But when you try to force compliance, what you get is defiance. I remember working on projects where the idea was to put specific questions and make it a hard stop, that if they didn't put those answers to those questions that they're supposed to ask the customer, they couldn't go on to the next screen. It was not even weeks before frontline people had it tapped down. They were just yes, 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 no, 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 yes, 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 no, no, yes, yes. I see it in the stores where the clerk is supposed to ask the customer, do you want to add your phone? And the clerk will often, they'll say, yeah, just hit skip that. Just hit skip. They don't do the step because they've not chosen that. They don't like that, and so they're going to defy it. Now you can keep forcing compliance, but now you have somebody watching them. And as long as they're watching them, well, then you start checking. But eventually what happens is you can't fire everybody, and so then you get at a stalemate, and you have the employees defying and leadership wanting compliance. And when you pay attention to it, you get a spike in compliance, and then it goes right back to what it was. So that's just one version. You probably have a version of it for yourself, and that's the one that you should be using. But that's the point. The human needs will be met whether you're making it happen or not. They're going to get that done, and sometimes it looks like people checking out. They're taking care of themselves, right? 2/3 of their waking hours are at